The member for Gippsland.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise to speak in support of the condolence motion, and I hope to draw on the strength of the heroes of Gippsland to help me express the enormity of the tragedy that has touched us all. Saturday, February the 7th, 2009 will always be remembered as the day that hell came to the paradise of the foothills of Gippsland. While the history books will record the bare facts, like the death toll, the homes lost, the extreme temperature and the hectares of forest burnt, they'll struggle to tell the stories of so many heroes of Gippsland. There's so many of them have emerged from this tragedy already. So much has already been written and spoken about the emergency services crews at the front line, but on behalf of Gippslanders, let me add my heartfelt thanks to the firefighters who have risked their lives to keep our community safe. While our CFA crews and Department of Sustainability and Environment firefighters are the most obvious heroes, they were joined by our police, our ambulance personnel, medical staff and SES crews in their efforts to save lives in the face of the most horrendous fire conditions our nation and certainly Gippsland has ever experienced. They were on the front line, but we've had dozens of emergency services workers behind the scenes in logistics and allocating the precious resources as this firestorm raged across Victoria, and the resources became more and more stretched throughout the day. Let no one be under any illusion. This was a storm beyond the experience of firefighters from across our region. I've spoken to firefighters with decades of experience in Gippsland, and they've never seen anything like it, but without their help, this could have been far worse. Speaker, yesterday I visited the tiny hamlet of Coligny, or to be more precise, I visited the site of where the tiny hamlet of Coligny used to stand. The destruction there, it simply defies description. The community hall and the school buildings are gone. There's home after home in ruin. There's cars which tragically have become coffins. There's enormous trees blackened and snapped in half, such was the ferocity of this storm. The land is scorched, and it was still smouldering several days after the fire front had passed. Where once we had a rainforest and abundant beauty as far as you could see, there was the ugly scar across the landscape. You could only identify the place names by the charred street signs that were still standing. Every so often, Speaker, we came across families who had been allowed to return yesterday for the first time, and they were searching through the rubble trying to find anything, just salvage anything at all from the wreckage, some memento that they could cling to. They've lost so much, but many of them would talk to us either there or at the community meetings they've attended, and they see themselves as the lucky ones because they've escaped with their lives. Almost bizarrely, Speaker, you'd see signs like sites like a swing set or a cubby house completely intact, not a mark on it, yet 20 metres away the house would be in ruins. And I think you'd only be human to shed a tear as you consider what was the fate of that family or the children who used to play there. Speaker, such is the nature of these fires that there would be homes left standing where whole neighbourhoods were destroyed. It didn't make sense, it doesn't make sense to the people who are returning there now. And tragically, people who have still got their homes are feeling guilty because their neighbours don't have theirs. And it's a horrible feeling for our community to come to grips with. We've lost more than 100 homes in Gippsland over the past 10 days, and we also believe that 21 people have perished, though we're not certain of those figures. The risk, though, is not over, and as I stand here today, there are still active fire grounds and many townships are on high alert in case the severe weather conditions return. As one of the wizened heads of the CFA put it to us quite bluntly, it's only rain that puts bushfires out in these forest-type conditions. And it's a great irony here in Australia today. We have much of Queensland underwater, and our thoughts go out to the Queenslanders while much of Victoria lays blackened in ruins. And our thoughts and our prayers are with those who are still fighting these fires and those who are actually fighting for their lives in hospital and the people who are caring for them at the moment. It will take many months for them to return to full health. While the Gippsland fires are a tragedy of epic proportions in themselves, I'm mindful they're only one part of a more hideous disaster right across Victoria, and it's going to take all of our strength as a community and as members of this place to overcome what lies ahead. I said at the outset there were many heroes of Gippsland emerging from this tragedy, and the people of Gippsland are setting an outstanding example for us all to follow here in this place. The Emergency Recovery Centre and the Gippsland Emergency Relief Fund have been inundated with donations and offers of help. The business community in its contributions to those who have lost so much have been staggering, but also in releasing their staff for the volunteer effort. It's just amazing the way the business sector and government departments are working hand in hand, working long hours well beyond what's expected of these people. The Red Cross volunteers, I know of one lady who's travelled 4 hours just to be there from Cann River to Traralgon to help complete strangers and hand out the food packages and the toiletry packages for these people who have lost so much. The Shire Council staff are working their own shifts and then volunteering their time on the weekends to assist and just to ensure that the needs of their friends and fire victims are met. We have friends and family members who are opening their homes to provide comfort for those who have been left with just the clothes they were wearing when the firestorm hit. I've been to many community meetings where hundreds of people have filled the halls because we still have that expectation the fire may return. Hundreds of people have filled the halls for the latest advice, and people will stand up and they'll say, thank you to CFA for trying so hard, even though they've lost everything, and they're there still saying thanks to those who have given so much to them. There are so many other heroes emerging from the tragedy across our region, from the ABC journalists and presenters who worked incredibly hard to keep us informed throughout what was a long and painful campaign of fighting the fires on Saturday right through to now. It's ongoing. The threat messages are coming out almost on a daily basis. To the people making the sandwiches and supporting the fire crews, and the neighbours who are just helping out a mate by dozing a fire break-in or putting out spot fires. The capacity of the community, the resilience of the community which is on display in Gippsland, I'm sure right across Victoria at the moment, is something which is quite amazing. Speaker, we should also spare a thought for those other heroes who have left with the hideous task of sifting through the wreckage for the remains. Theirs must be the most difficult job of all, and I'm sure they'll need our support in the months which lie ahead. And out of that wreckage has come some more heroes. It seems that every second person I've spoken to in Gippsland over the last 3 days has a remarkable survival story of their own. Yesterday I spoke with a beautiful old lady, I estimate in her early 70s, only about 4'3" of her, I think I'd imagine. She simply trotted away from her home in Coligny and jumped into a dam. And she was there for several hours all by herself, and the fire remarkably spared her home. And she was telling me what a hard time she was having getting the mud out of her clothes. And I met a teenage boy with a far more probably chilling story. It was a family of 4. They were very well prepared. They had their fire pumps attached to their swimming pool. They had the vegetation slashed. They had the hoses at the ready. They didn't even get ember attack or any warning whatsoever. They were just met with a wall of flame when it finally hit them. When the wind changed and rushed their way, it was a wall of flame. They sought refuge in their home as they'd been taught to do, and as it turns out, their home probably did save them, but they were forced to race from room to room as each roof collapsed and they moved to the next room. Finally, at the end of the house, to their rumpus room, luckily they had a pretty big house by the sound of it, the roof fell around them and they dashed out and jumped into their pool where they started the whole battle. And when that became too hot, they also dashed to a dam and survived to tell the story. Others told me of the confidence that they could handle this. They could handle a bushfire. They were well prepared. They knew what the task was ahead of them, but when the wind changed on Saturday night and the fire descended on them in all its fury, they made such last-minute dashes for survival. Against all advice that we've given them in the past, they had to get out of there, and they did, and they survived. As we know, of course, many people didn't survive that last-minute dash, and I've never been so proud of my community to see the survivors now volunteering their time and chipping in to help others who they regard as being less fortunate. It's an amazing relief effort on the ground at the moment. And it's the same story, I understand, being repeated across Victoria with the unimaginable grief, the destruction, but it's coupled with those stories of incredible survival. There are just so many heroes out there for us to celebrate. Speaker, I believe that this is our chance to all become heroes in our own small way. This is not about us, it's about the fire victims. And there's no time for our political games. We must commit ourselves to helping those people to rebuild their lives. Towns like Coligny, Cornella, Devon North and Ballara and Gippsland are just like Kinglake and Whittlesea and Marysville and Flowerdale on the northern outskirts of Melbourne. These communities can't be burnt off the face of the earth no matter how fierce the firestorm. These communities live on in the hearts and the memories, the dreams and the hopes of the future for the families who live there, and it's our job to help them return if that's their choice. We must stand shoulder to shoulder with our fellow Australians at this time as we all come to terms with the grief, the absolute anger, the disbelief, Speaker, the anger and the disbelief that many of us are feeling at the moment. For those of us who are not directly impacted by this firestorm, we must be there to help them pick them up and assist them in the hard times. which will undoubtedly lie ahead for them all. I would like to put on the record my sincere thanks to those other MPs who have contacted me, including the Prime Minister, the Opposition Leader, the Leader of the Nationals, who have expressed their support for the people of Gippsland. There has been so much goodwill in the speeches I've heard as I've travelled throughout the fire-hit areas of my electorate in recent days. We need to turn those kind words of support into action on the ground to help the heroes of Gippsland in the weeks ahead. I commend the state and the federal governments for their prompt action, dare I say, Prime Minister, decisive action to date. But our communities are already tired, and this recovery will require months and years of effort and resources on the ground. My community, I know, stands united in its determination to rebuild, and we mustn't let them down. Finally, Speaker, I believe it's up to us to make sure that we learn from whatever mistakes have been made. And now is not the time for apportioning blame, but when the hundreds of lives have been lost across Victoria, tough questions must be asked, and our community expects us to find the answers. I fear that we may have made the mistake of underestimating the force of these fires and perhaps overestimating our own capacity to deal with them. The message of leave early or stay and defend a well-prepared property has been a mantra for more than 20 years, and I know I've repeated it myself in media releases and in comments to my constituents, but it may be the wrong message on days like February the 7th, when the fire risk, according to all the experts, was off the scale. I fear that there are some places which are simply impossible for us to defend on days of such extreme fire danger. I'm not advocating forced evacuations. Many people want that right to stay and defend their property, and I respect that right. They know it's their choice, and they know that there won't be a CFA tanker at their doorstep to help them out in a crisis. But what I'm suggesting is we may need to have an escalated level of threat or warning. We need to let these people know that they are likely, there is every likelihood that they may well perish if they stay in certain parts of our state on days when the fire risk is so extreme and fires erupt for whatever cause. Regardless of how well prepared they are, there are certain properties, I believe, in parts of our state which are completely beyond defending. It's not a question of being wise after the event. I think it's an issue for the Royal Commission to examine closely, and I'm sure it will. I've spoken to many Gippslanders who thought they were ready, but when the firestorm hit, they had absolutely no warning, and again, I'm not apportioning blame. They simply had no time to receive a warning and no defences against the ferocity of the blaze which descended upon them. As I said, there will be a Royal Commission. I trust that the practical experience of these people on the ground will be listened to. We cannot allow so many people to have lost their lives in vain. Speaker, I'd also hate to see this tragedy used as a reason to depopulate regional Australia. We do have an enduring love affair with the bush. It can be tranquil, it can be magnificent. It's a beautiful place for us to visit and to live, but on Saturday it erupted into a storm of such unimaginable fury. For those of us who do choose to live in regional Australia, we must learn to live with the threat of bushfires and minimise the opportunities in the future for such a disaster to be repeated. But I must repeat, Speaker, we must not use this as an opportunity to scare people away from living in regional Australia. We must let people return to rebuild as soon as is humanly possible and go on with their lives as best they can after such a tragedy. We need these people to remain in our communities. Speaker, we need these people to continue making their outstanding contribution to that rich fabric of life in rural and regional Australia. Speaker, I've purposely focused on the heroes of Gippsland rather than the villain of this tragedy. Just last week I spoke in this place about the community of Ballara, which had lost 30 homes at the hands of an arsonist. We don't know who lit this inferno, but it is regarded as suspicious and the police believe it was deliberately lit. We don't know who lit the inferno which killed so many of our loved ones, but it is an unspeakable crime that stands condemned by all right-thinking men and women. There is a seething anger in my community that we have a traitor in our midst. As much as we pray for those who have perished, we hope their killer is brought to justice. Speaker, too many good people have lost their lives already. The heroes of Gippsland didn't deserve this.